Bud Not Buddy, Chapters 6 and 7. Uh-oh. My eyes opened and I could see the sun behind the branch of a Christmas tree. I jumped up, folded my blanket inside my suitcase, hid it, and started running the 6 or 7 blocks down to the mission. I turned the corner and said, Whew! There were still people lined up waiting. I started walking along the line. The end was a lot further away than I thought. The line turned all the way around 2 corners, then crossed over one street before I saw the last person. Shucks. I went I walked up to get behind him. He said, "Line's closed. These folks are the last ones." He pointed at a man standing next to a woman who was carrying a baby. "But, sir, he said, "But nothing. Line's closed. These here folks are the last ones." It was time to start lying. If I didn't get any food now, I'd have to steal something out of someone's garbage, or I wouldn't be able to eat until the mission opened for supper. "Sir, I The man raised his hand and said, "Look, kid, everybody's got a story and everybody knows the rules. The line closes at 7 o'clock. How's it fair that these people who've been here since 5 o'clock, that you can sleep until," he looked at his wristwatch, "until 7:15, then come busting down here expecting to eat? You think you got some kind of special privilege just 'cause you're skinny and raggedy? Look in the line. There's lots of folks who look just like you. You ain't the worst." Supper starts at 6 p.m., but you see how things is. If you plan on getting fed, you better be in line by 4. Now get out of here before I get rough with you. Shucks, being hungry for a whole day is about as bad as it can get. I said, "But—" He reached in his pocket and pulled something out that looked like a heavy black strap and slapped it across his hand. Uh-oh, here we go again. He said, "That's it. No more talk. You opened your mouth one time too many. You rotten kids today don't listen to no one, but I'm going to show you something that'll improve your hearing." He slapped the strap on his hand and started walking towards me. I was wrong when I said being hungry for a day is about as bad as it can get, because being hungry plus having a big knot on your head from a black leather strap would be even worse. I backed away, but only got 2 steps before I felt a giant warm hand wrap around my neck from behind. I looked up to see whose doggone hand was so doggone big and why they put it around my neck. A very tall, square-shaped man in old blue overalls looked down at me and said, "Clarence, what took you so long?" I got ready to say, "My name's not Clarence, and please don't choke me, sir. I'll leave." But as soon as I opened my mouth, he gave my head a big shake and said, "I told you to hurry back. Now where have you been?" He gave me a shove and said, "Get back in line with your mama." I looked up and down the line to see who was supposed to be my mama when a woman pointed her finger at her feet and said, "Clarence, you get over here right now." There were 2 little kids hanging on to her skirt. I walked over to where she was, and she gave me a good hard smack on the head. Shucks, for someone who was just pretending to be my mama, she sure did slap me a good one. I said, "Ow!" The big square man who grabbed my neck looked at the man with the strap and said, "Boy had to go use the crapper. I told him not to waste time, but like you said, these kids today don't listen to nobody." The strap man looked at the size of the man who called me Clarence and walked back to the end of the line. When the overall man got back in line, I said, "Thank you, sir. I really tried to get," but he popped me in the back of the head and said, "Next time, don't be gone so long." The 2 kids busted out laughing and said, "Na na 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 na, Clarence got a lickin', Clarence got a lickin'." I told them, "Shut up and don't call me." Then both my pretend papa and my pretend mama smacked me in my head. She looked at the people directly behind us and said, "Mercy, when they get to be this age." The people weren't too happy about me taking cuts in line, but when they looked at how big my pretend daddy was and they saw how hard him and my pretend mama were going upside my head, they decided they wouldn't say anything. I was grateful to these people, but I wish they'd quit popping me on the head, and it seems like with all the names in the world they could have come up with a better one for me than Clarence. I stood in line with my pretend family for a long, long time. Everybody was very quiet about standing in line, even my pretend brother and sister and all the other kids. When we finally got around the last corner and could see the door and folks going in it, seemed like a bubble busted and people started laughing and talking. The main thing people were talking about was the great big sign that was hanging over the building. It showed a gigantic picture of a family of 4 rich white people sitting in a car driving somewhere. You could tell it was a family because they all looked exactly alike. The only difference amongst them was that the daddy had a big head and a hat, and Mama had the same head with a woman's hat, and the girl had 2 big yellow pigtails coming out from above her ears. They all had big shiny teeth and big shiny eyes and big shiny cheeks and big shiny smiles. Shucks, you'd need to squint your eyes if that shiny family drove anywhere near you. You could tell they were rich because the car looked like it had room for 8 or 9 more people in it because they had movie star clothes on. Oh, and because they had movie star clothes on. The woman was wearing a coat with a hunk of fur around the neck, and the man was wearing a suit and a tie, and the kids looked like they were wearing $10 a piece jackets. Writ above their car in fancy letters, it said, "There's no place like America today." My pretend daddy read it and said, uh, uh, uh. Well, you gotta give them credit. You wouldn't expect that they'd have the nerve to come down here and tell the truth. When we finally got into the building, it was worth the wait. The first thing you noticed when you got inside was how big the place was, and how many people were in it, and how quiet it was. The only sound you could hear was when someone scraped a spoon across the bottom of their bowl, or pulled a chair in, or put one back, or when people in front of you dragged their feet on the floor, moving up to where they were spooning out the food. After we'd picked our spoons and bowls, a lady dug a big mess of oatmeal out of a giant pot and swapped it down into our bowls. She smiled and said, "I hope you enjoy." Me and my pretend family all said, "Thank you, ma'am." Then a man put 2 pieces of bread and an apple and a big glass of milk on our tray and said, "Please read the signs to your children. Thank you." We all said, "Thank you, sir." Then we walked past some signs and someone had stuck up on the wall. One said, "Please do not smoke." Another said, "Please eat as quickly and quietly as possible." Another one said, "Please be considerate and patient. Clean up after yourself. Your neighbors will be eating after you." And the last one said, "We are terribly sorry, but we have no work available." My pretend daddy read the signs to my pretend brother and sister, and we all sat at a long table with strangers on both sides of us. The oatmeal was delicious. I poured some of my milk into it so it wouldn't be so lumpy and mixed it all together. My pretend mother opened her pocketbook and took out a little brown envelope. She reached inside and sprinkled something on my pretend brother and sister's oatmeal. Then she said to me, "I know that's not as much as you normally get, but I wanted to ask you if you minded sharing some with Clarence." They pouted and gave me a couple dirty looks. My pretend mother said, "Good," and emptied the rest of the envelope over my oatmeal. Brown sugar! Shucks, I didn't even mind them calling me Clarence anymore. I said, "Thank you, Mama, ma'am." She and my pretend daddy laughed and said, "It took you long enough to catch on, Clarence." He acted like he was going to smack me again, but he didn't. After we'd finished all our food, we put our bowls up and I thanked my pretend family again. I asked them, "Are you going to be coming back for supper?" My pretend mama said, "No, dear, we only come here mornings. But you make sure you get here plenty early, you hear?" "Yes, ma'am." I watched them walk away. My pretend brother looked back at me and stuck his tongue out, then reached up and took my pretend mother's hand. I couldn't really blame him. I don't think I'd be real happy about sharing my brown sugar and my folks with any strange kids either. Chapter 7. I pushed the heavy door open and walked into the library. The air in the library isn't like the air anywhere else. First, it's always cooler than the air outside. It feels like you're walking into a cellar on a hot July day, even if you have to walk up a bunch of stairs to get into it. The next thing about the air in the library is that no other place smells anything like it. If you close your eyes and try to pick out what it is that you're sniffing, you're only going to get confused because all the smells have blended together and turned themselves into a different one. As soon as I got into the library, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I got a whiff of the leather on all the old books, a smell that got real strong if you picked one of them up and stuck your nose real close to it when you turned pages. Then there was a smell then there was the smell of the cloth that covered the brand new books, the books that made a splitting sound when you opened them. Then I could sniff the paper, that soft, powdery, drowsy smell that comes off the pages in little puffs when you're reading something or looking at some pictures, a kind of hypnotizing smell. I think that's the smell that makes so many folks fall asleep in the library. You'll see someone turn a page, and you can imagine a puff of page powder coming up real slow and easy until it starts piling onto the person's eyelashes, weighing theirs down so much that they stay down a little longer after each blink, and finally making them so heavy that they just don't come back up at all. Then their mouths come open and their heads start bouncing up and down like they're bobbing in a big tub of water for apples, and before you know it, whoop, zoop, sloop, they're out cold and their face thunks down smack dab on the book. That's the part that gets librarians the maddest. They get real upset if folks start drooling in the books, and page powder or not, they don't want to hear no excuses you gotta get out. Drooling in the books is even worse than laughing out loud in the library. And even though it might seem kind of mean, you can't really blame the librarians for tossing drooly folks out, because there's nothing worse than opening a book and having the pages all stuck together from someone's dried up slobber. I opened my eyes to start looking for Miss Hill. She wasn't at the lending desk, so I left my suitcase with the white lady there. I knew it would be safe. I walked between the stacks to see if Miss Hill was putting books up. 3 doggone times I walked through the library, upstairs and down, and I couldn't find her. I went back up to the librarian at the lending desk. I waited until she looked up at me. She smiled and said, "Yes? Would you like to retrieve your suitcase?" She reached under the desk. I said, "No, ma'am. Could I ask you a question?" She said, "Of course, young man. How may I help you?" "I'm looking for Miss Hill." The librarian looked surprised. "Miss Hill? My goodness, haven't you heard?" Uh-oh. That's number 16 of Bud Caldwell's Rules and Things for Having a Funner Life and Making a Better Liar Out of Yourself. That's one of the worst ones. Rules and Things number 16. If a grown-up ever starts a sentence by saying, "Haven't you heard?" get ready, because what's about to come out of their mouth is going to drop you headfirst into a boiling tragedy. It seems like the answer to "haven't you heard" always has something to do with someone kicking the bucket. And not kicking the bucket in a calm, peaceful way like a heart attack at home in bed either. It usually is some kind of dying that will make your eyes buck out of your head when you hear about it. It's usually the kind of thing that will run you out of a room with your hands over your ears and your mouth open wide. Something like hearing that your grandmother got her whole body pulled through the wringer on a washing machine, or something like hearing about a horse slipping on the ice and landing on someone you went to school with. I answered, "No, ma'am," and my stomach got ready to hear about Miss Hill biting the dust in some way that was going to give me nightmares. The librarian said, "There's no need for you to look so stricken. It's not bad news, young man." She laughed a quiet librarian type laugh and said, "Really, it's not bad news, unless you had matrimonial plans concerning Miss Hill." I pretended I knew what she was talking about. Most times, if you listen to how grown folks ask a question, they let you know what it is they want to hear. I said, "No, ma'am, I didn't plan that at all." She laughed again and said, "Good, because I don't think her new husband will appreciate the competition." Miss Hill is currently living in Chicago, Illinois. I said, "Husband? You mean she got married, ma'am?" The librarian said, "Oh, yes, and I must tell you, she was radiating happiness." I said, "And she moved all the way to Chicago?" "That's right, but Chicago isn't that far. Here, I'll show you." She reached under her desk and pulled out a thick leather book called Atlas of the United States of America. She thumbed through a couple pages and said, "Here we are." She turned the book to me. It was a big map of Michigan and a couple of the states that were next to it. "We're here," she pointed to the spot that said Flint, "and Chicago is here in Illinois." They looked pretty close, but I know how tricky maps can be. Shucks, they can put the whole world on one page on a map. And I said, "How long would it take someone to walk that far?" She said, "Oh dear, quite a while, I'm afraid. Let's check the distance." She reached under the desk and pulled out another thick book called Standard Highway Mileage Guide and turned to a page that had a million numbers and city names on it. She showed me how to find the Chicago on the line that was running across the page and Flint on the line that was running down the page, and then look at the number that was writ where the two of them joined up. It said 270. She pulled a pencil out and said, "Okay, this is how one figures the amount of time required to walk to Chicago." Now, she pulled out a third book. Shucks, this is one of the bad things about talking to librarians. I asked one question and she already had us digging through 3 different books. She thumbed through the book until she said, "Aha, it says here that the average male human gait is 5 miles an hour. Okay, assuming that you could cover 5 miles an hour, all we have to do is divide 270 by 5. She did it and said, 55 hours. 54 hours. Much too long to be practical. No, I'm afraid you'll simply have to wait until Miss Rollins comes back to Flint for a visit." Shucks. Chicago might as well be a million miles away from Flint, and Miss Hill might as well be a squashed, crunched up mess in a washing machine when it came down to helping me now. I thanked the librarian for the bad news and went to sit at one of the big heavy tables so I could think what to do next. Going back to the home was out. It used to be that we get a new kid every once in a while, but lately it seems like there's a couple of new kids every day. Mostly babies, and they're mostly always sick. It's not like it was when I first got there. Shucks. Half the folk that run it don't even tell you their name and don't remember yours unless you're in trouble all the time or getting ready to move out. After a while, I got my suitcase and walked into the regular air and stinking smells of Flint. That library door closing after I walked out was the exact kind of door Mama had told me about. I knew that since it had closed, the next one was about to open. I went back under my tree, and before I knew it, I was asleep.